Hi there, it's Jacob Gibson. Today is March 6th, 2024. This is my video recording for the sensory portfolio. For this portfolio assignment, I chose to explore a little bit more into sensory receptors. As I was doing kind of some of the assignments, I just realized that I was getting a little bit confused and overwhelmed with all the different types of receptors. So I thought this assignment would be a good way for me to kind of organize and synthesize all the information that has been given to us. So when it comes to sensory receptors are involved in what we call sensory transduction, which seems like it's a very complicated word, but it's really, really simple. Sensory transduction, all it is where you are taking some sort of stimulus. So for example, right here we see with the eye is taking in light information, and then it is being converted into a neural signal. All right, and that's all sensory transduction does. And there's a lot of different types of receptors that do this. So mechanical receptors deal with responding to touch. Thermal receptors dealing with responses due to heat, are converting heat responses into neural signals. Photoreceptors, you're dealing again light into neural signals. Chemical receptors, you're dealing with chemicals being converted into neural signals. Neuroreceptors, again, you're dealing with some sort of stimulus that may cause pain, and then there's some sort of stimulus, and then it's being converted into pain. And then proprioceptors, which are dealing with changes of movement and position with muscles and things like that. So all of these different types of receptors make up what we sense as human beings, or the five kind of core senses of what it is to be human, either through touch, vision, smell, taste, or hearing. So they're really, really important to the body. So in order to kind of organize this, what I did here is I broke down all of the different senses, and then I looked at what are the different receptors for each of the senses there below. So for touch, there are a lot of different receptors there. There's mechanical receptors, which again, one example would be Pacian corpuscles. That's going to deal with pressure and vibration. Messenger corpuscles deal with fine touch. Merkel cells, again, also deal with fine touch, even to a more extent. Ruffini endings, which are dealing with kind of stretching. And then as well as there's some free nerve endings that also deal with mechanical receptions, which are dealing with that pressure piece. So when it comes to touch, we think about, okay, I'm just touching this wall here, but there's a lot of different receptors that are constantly firing in order to determine the stimulus here and convert it into a neural signal, dealing with fine touches and all of that. But on top of touch, we also sometimes are going to be feeling just kind of our position and kind of relating to where our positions of our where our body parts are, and those are proprioceptors. Those are going to be muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs. That's a lot of dealing with kind of more of the muscles and where the muscles relate to themselves in space. But then also when you touch something, you're dealing a lot of times with temperature. So thermal receptors are also involved, and it's kind of really interesting when you look at it. Well, there's some of these mechanical receptors that we're using just to feel pressure also will be involved in thermal reception as well. So Ruffini endings, free nerve endings, and free nerve endings are also involved in dealing with pain or nororeceptors. So touch is a very, very complicated piece of the sensory system. This is just kind of how it works in the nervous system. So there's some sort of stimulus, and again, it's going to hit one of those receptors. So this right here, this should be a Pacian corpuscle. And what would happen is as soon as you keep putting that pressure on that corpuscle, eventually those channels in that corpuscle are going to open, and that's going to generate an action potential. And then that action potential would travel down a first order neuron, go into the spine and go to a second order, and then it would reach the thalamus. And then from the thalamus, it would go again on a third order neuron, and it would again go to that sensory motor cortex to kind of process that information. Things work similar with touch, with temperature and pain. But just kind of wanted to give a general view of how the sensory works to the uh, to the the central nervous system. And then when we get to vision, so again, the stimulus here is going to be light, and there's really going to be two major photoreceptors. So now instead of dealing with pressure, we're dealing with taking the stimulus of light, and converting it into a neural signal. So rods are going to be firing when we are detecting kind of low lights. It's kind of associated with kind of the darker colors. And then cones are going to be firing when you're dealing with really high lights. So these are examples of again how these different photoreceptors detect things. And again, this is how it would be perceived in the central nervous system. Again, that light is brought into the eye. It is then goes through sensory transduction, where you are dealing with the retina back here. That is converting that light, or the rods and cones in the retina are converting that light into a neural signal. That neural signal goes down the optic nerve here into the optic chiasm, and then again that would flow to the thalamus, which is kind of that. It's the part of the brain that sends out information, and then from the thalamus it would go to the visual cortex to be processed. So it's kind of crazy that our brain is just constantly firing and taking in all of this visual information. When we deal with smell, smell again, we're not taking in light stimulus, we're not taking in temperature, pain, or anything like that, but we're actually taking in chemicals. And these are going to be olfactory receptors. Mainly, they're going to detect those odorants. Sometimes you also will detect pheromones. That's going to deal kind of more with kind of social sexual behavior. But you're dealing with smell. Anytime you're smelling, what's happening in the central nervous system, or how that's being taken up by the central nervous system, is again you have your chemical receptors right here in the upper part of the nostril. They're taking those chemical messages, and then they are converting it into again a neural message that can travel to the olfactory bulb, and then will travel later into the brain, into the part of the brain that detects smells, or the olfactory cortex. So then we go here to taste. Now, taste and smell have been kind of correlated, but they're actually completely different things. So when we taste something, or the smell comes off the taste, what's happening are those chemicals are traveling up the nasopharynx in your throat there, and it's going back, and it's generating that smell. So part of the things that we taste are dealing with just kind of also chemical receptors in the nose that are more of a smell rather than an actual taste piece. Now, when it comes to taste, things like sourness, bitterness, sweetness, that's going to come from right here in our taste buds. Our taste buds are full of different chemoreceptors right in here. The different chemoreceptors, again, are going to generate those action potentials, and it's going to, again, travel right up in here, and it's going to travel again to the thalamus, and it will send that information to be processed. So when it comes to sensory receptors, we're dealing with, again, mechanical stuff. We're dealing with or mechanical stimulus. We're dealing with light stimulus, and then from the taste and smell, we're dealing with chemical reception as well. And then auditory. Auditory is actually another form of mechanical reception. So what happens is the sound waves, they reach these little hair cells in our ears, and then what happens is, again, they get that messages or whatever information stimulates those hair cells, and then it gets converted into a neural message. So it comes right in here, gets the information, and then it converts it into a neural stimulus, and then that would begin and go into the auditory cortex, which would be on the sides of the brain. So Again, that's a different form of mechanical receptor. So there's some kind of overlap between the different receptors when it comes to the major 5 senses that we have as humans. This is just kind of a big chart that I put together to kind of put it all together. So mechanical receptors, again, that's dealing with pressure and touch. These are all the different ones here that you will see that generate kind of the main 5 senses. Again, there's more of them. I'm just trying to get just a quick summary. Photoreceptors, that's dealing with spatial awareness. Your thermal receptors, that's dealing with heat, pain. Photoreceptors dealing with light stimuluses, and then chemoreceptors dealing with chemical, and that's going to be mainly, again, your taste and smell. So hopefully that kind of breaks all the different receptors up there and makes a little bit more sense. So thank you very much.